Welcome to Love and Trauma, the real deal. I'm Danielle Sebastian, best-selling author, coach, and yes, I've been through the marriage trenches myself. This show is all about how to actually deal with trauma in relationships and make it work without losing your mind. If you're ready for honest talk, no fluff, and tools that cut through the noise, tune in because let's face it, love can be a bit of a mess, but it's a mess worth figuring out. This is Love and Trauma, the real deal. Did you know that up to 95% of people who are seeking treatment for a substance use disorder have a history of trauma? And here's another statistic that completely blew my mind, and that is that 75% of people in addiction treatment report experiencing some kind of emotional, physical, or sexual abuse. And when addiction and trauma collide, it can really wreak havoc on relationships, especially the ones that we care the most about. And let's be real, with the holidays coming up, this is a very timely conversation because while the holidays can bring a ton of joy to people's lives, trauma survivors tend to have a difficult time around the holidays. And one of the things that they may reach out to during the holidays in order to cope and maybe numb some of the pain that they are experiencing is alcohol and drugs. And let's just face it, when we're with family and friends and parties, there's more access as well. So that is why I am so excited today. I think it's very timely that I was able to sit down with Corey Martin. And let me tell you, Corey's not your typical recovery coach. She's not a doctor. She's not a therapist. She's not a 12-step sponsor, but she's a comedian. Yes, you heard that right, a comedian. So this is going to be, pretty exciting. So yes, Corey's years in the entertainment industry gave her a front row seat to the intersection of addiction, mental health, and trauma. And she's here to shake up everything that you think you know about addiction and recovery. Corey spent years loving people who struggled with addiction, family, friends, even romantic partners. And she's seen firsthand what works, what doesn't, and why so many of us may feel stuck. She's used all that hard-earned knowledge to create the Recovery Revolution, a coaching platform that's all about helping partners and families understand addiction, heal their own pain, and actually support their loved ones in a way that works. And here's the best part. If you stick around to the end of this conversation, Corey's going to share some unexpected insights that I didn't realize that might completely change the way you think about addiction, trauma, and what's possible in our relationships, especially as we head into the holiday season. So trust me, this is one that you don't want to miss. So grab your tea, grab your coffee, and let's get some real solutions and feel more empowered in our relationships. So let's dive into my conversation. Excited to have Corey join us today. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat with you.
So Corey, tell me just a little bit about your background and what led you to be doing what you're doing today.
So my background is I am a comedian, actually. My background is in performance art theater. I did some film. I have done a lot of traveling goofballery in my life. And if you know anything about comedy or the entertainment industry, you know a lot of people who are very, very funny and very talented are also deeply, deeply struggling with trauma, with mental illness, and with addiction. So I actually created a platform or a business called the Recovery Revolution, and we focus on supporting the partners and family members of people who are struggling with addiction to help them learn the best ways to show up, the best responses to someone in their life that is deeply struggling. Because one thing I have noticed across all of my friends, all of my what would you call like acquaintances or people that I've worked with, the one thing they all have in common is a deeply unsupportive family and social circle when it comes to any addiction issues they may have. Now, with trauma, you can sometimes find a support system. Maybe the support system doesn't know what to do, but they still hope that you'll get help and, they're compassionate. I find that once it reaches that addiction realm, that's when the hatred and the bitterness and the anger comes out, and you lose so many of the people close to you or who should be there in support of you. And it's just a lack of education and a lack of experience with working with people like that. So that's what I do. I work with the partners and families to teach them here's how to here's how to think about someone who struggles with addiction. Here's how you can perceive them in a more positive light so that you're not looking at them through a lens of evil, which really, really hinders their ability to get the help that they need.
You have a personal story where
Yep.
you were in this position before. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I have a few personal stories. So I have had loved ones, friends, um, romantic partners, various characters in my life throughout my life who have struggled with addiction. My best friend struggled with, I mean, early in our friendship, struggled with alcohol, then struggled with drugs, and went through a very long period of like deep, deep addiction where we thought we were going to lose her and kind of had to grieve her before she was lost, and she had a pretty miraculous and incredible recovery that was really educational for me. I had a what I'll call a situationship, a long-term situationship with someone who struggled deeply with alcoholism, and that was probably the most educational relationship, but that came after years of me being in friendships and relationships and having family members and people in my life who struggled with really resistant self-destructive behaviors, where those people really believed that this self-destruction was the only solution for them. It's kind of started for me with a good friend of mine when I was a teenager and until I was 21. He was an alcoholic, but he also struggled deeply with depression, and he ended up taking his own life when we were 21. And that was kind of the what I would say the seed being planted in me to start considering people who struggled with mental health, substance abuse, etc., start considering that a little more carefully, less judgmentally. And I started seeing the like everyone around me as like these are people, these aren't failures, these are full stories that could either end in a really tragic way or could end in a really positive way. But this story is going to end. Every human story is going to end at some point. And having that experience really reframed how I was able to engage with people when I met someone who was struggling with addiction. But it also had the benefit of being incredibly traumatic for me. So losing a friend in that way, in that circumstance, made me so much more susceptible to deep codependency, which was already kind of rooted in me just by, the way I was brought up and the values that were instilled in me, the things I observed as a child. I was already kind of well primed to be deeply codependent. But losing someone to what I believed was my failure to show up in the right way really made me so much more, I'd say, motivated to like rescue people in my life. And through this like hyper motivated rescuing, I actually ended up I ended up uncodependenting myself by learning how to help people the right way, which only can happen if you are stable, if you are well grounded, if you have an accurate view of reality, if you're able to be a little bit objective and engage with them in a healthy way. That's the only way you can help them. But it took about 10 years of me completely falling off and jumping into other people's delusions and participating in people's mental illness with them in an attempt to drag them out of it for me to actually learn the perspective and the skill set that I now teach my clients so that they can help their addicted loved ones or loved ones who struggle with mental illness so that they can help them to get the help that they need.
Let's talk about codependence,
Sure.
the way that we do not want to be in relationships or tackle this subject. What did it look like for you, and what do you see in your clients? Describe that for us.
Yeah. So first I want to give kind of a caveat because a lot of people, and I've had interviews and I've talked to people who are in this industry and who work with either recovery or trauma healing who really struggle with the word codependency. They don't like it. They feel like it's sort of like a dismissal of like a genuine relational care, right? Like we should be caring about the people in our lives who are struggling. We should want to help them. And so calling it codependency is really dismissive. It makes people feel like there's something wrong with them, etc. Now, I take a more nuanced approach when it comes to defining and dealing with codependency. One, it's not in the DSM, and I'm not a psychiatrist, so none of that even matters. Codependency is just a concept that was born out of AA. And codependency refers to the partner of, specifically, it refers to the wife of an alcoholic man. That was how the word originally came about. And it's not just if you're a wife of an alcoholic man, you're codependent. The dynamic of a codependent is that she is dependent on his addiction, on his alcoholism. His alcoholism is serving some kind of a purpose or function in her life also, right? So to free yourself from codependency doesn't mean you leave that relationship. It means that your life is defined based on your values and your needs and your, skill set, your strengths and your personality. It's not defined based on your relationship to their addiction, right? Codependent being they are dependent and you are dependent along with them, right? So if you're looking at the shape of that, it's more of a triangular shape. I would call it like what is it? The right angle triangle? Is it the isosceles? I don't remember. I took
Good
geometry twice. I should
question.
know this.
I have a middle schooler. Yeah, I should know
So,
that too.
so if they've got a straight line to their addiction right there, we've got a straight line to them. We've got a longer line to their addiction, but we're still connected to it, right? What we really want to see if you're actually having a healthy relationship is you want to see the connection being between you and that person, and you're creating this third thing that is the relationship. That person has their addiction and has their other relationships. Those are off over here. Those are not part of you. Those are part of them. Now, they'll bring them into the relationship and they can inform the relationship, but you get to decide how you engage with it. In a codependent relationship, it's a little bit on its head, right? It's not an equal structure. In a codependent relationship, we are leaning on that person who's struggling with addiction. While it seems like they're draining us and they are really depleting us in all these ways, what's really happening is we've found a sense of identity in helping them, in saving them, in doing too much for them. That has like slurped our entire life essence out of us, right? That's pulled us out and into this like weird, gross dynamic with them. So that's the difference between codependency and, like, for example, like just like a healthy interdependency, like people talk about, or just the natural care that we can have. You can care about someone who struggles with addiction. You can be in a relationship with them. You can love them. You can support them without being codependent. And you can be in a relationship with someone and go too far and veer into codependency. So that's the way I hope that people, if they learn anything from this, I hope they can get a more nuanced perspective of what codependency is so that they can identify, am I there? Has this gone too far? Easy ways to tell is what kind of conversations do you have? Do you talk about things that aren't that person? For me, when I was super deep in codependency, I literally didn't have a conversation that wasn't about my partner at the time who was struggling. I literally only had conversations that circled around about them. I couldn't talk about my own goals. I couldn't talk about my own ideas. And if I did, I would figure out a way to tie them into it. So everything was around and about that person. They were my identity, and their addiction and my ability to save them was my identity. The the reason I put that in quotes is because you can actually help people, right? And you know this. Like you can support someone's recovery, you can help someone get help. You can show up in a way that works, but there's a difference between doing that as like just a behavior. That's just something we're doing, and being that as an overreaching identity.
That is very helpful because I do think that term gets thrown around a lot and it does have a negative. connotation for sure, but also just know, I think that people don't really understand in general
Yeah.
what that means and what that feels
Yeah.
like. So in a partner, I think it plays out with, you start out just at that person becomes, their recovery becomes all consuming for you.
Hmm.
Your
Their
needs,
addiction. Yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
your needs go to the wayside. It results in you being burned out. And actually, by you feeling like you need to be everything for that person, you're actually not making things better for that
Right.
person.
Yeah, exactly. Because I, you're not making things better for that person. I want to piggyback off of that. The reason you're not making things better is because you've actually robbed them of a relationship with you. Because your identity has shifted out of something authentic and representative of you as an autonomous person and has now morphed into them. So there's no longer a relationship, and we really need healthy relationships in order to heal. So by creating an identity out of them and their addiction, all they have to interact with is the addiction, right? That's the
That
only thing
is
left.
that
When
is
they're connecting with
perfectly
you, they're
said.
just connecting. Yeah, they're just connecting with their addiction.
And not able to identify what those behaviors are resulting from,
Right.
because you're always there trying to fix it, taking it on for them, being there, making excuses for some of those behaviors.
Hmm. Yeah, you cloud their view of reality is really what it is.
Right.
You don't give them that opportunity to view their own situation or to even look at you. Like, if you are just as much part of their addiction as they are and you're crying over it, guess who's crying more? Them. They don't care, right? They
Yes.
can't see you as a separate entity if you're not functioning as one. So they can't learn anything from you.
What was a defining moment when you were in a codependent relationship that you made you realize that your current methods weren't working?
A lot of my time during that season was spent in my car. I was actually an Uber driver in Los Angeles, and yeah, a lot of people moved to LA to like go find their dreams, and I moved there to like drive Uber and get drunk. But you know what? It was very educational. Um, so what I really did was I spent so much time just trying to figure out how to solve the problem for them that I accidentally stumbled on enough accurate information. The more you try to gain knowledge around something, the more likely it is that you're going to land on something accurate. If you're just stuck in that kind of what I call the crab bucket of like online support groups, where it's all just like talking about them and you know kind of complaining or woe is me vent sessions, you're not going to come upon a solution. Big one that kind of like the glass shatter moment. I don't know if you remember How I Met Your Mother. There's like glass shattering thing, and you can't see something a different way ever again, um, or you can't see something the same way. My moment for that was I realized that everybody in this person's life, I didn't include myself in it yet, but I was so critical, and I was like, they're doing it wrong, and he's doing it wrong, and she shouldn't have said that to him, and they shouldn't be doing this. And I had this list of how all these people were messing it up. And the one thing was all these people were saying that, hey, he needs to go to therapy. He just needs to go to therapy. He just needs to get help and go to therapy. And I looked at all those people and I was like, all of y'all need therapy. All of y'all are messed up. You're all contributing poorly to this problem. And once I realized that they were all part of the problem, it was just like you could like just blown at me, and I would have tipped over into realizing, oh, I am also of those people in his life a part of the problem. If everyone is wrong blaming him, then I'm also wrong blaming them and blaming him, right? If I think all this finger pointing is wrong, I need to stop pointing this finger. Okay, so that was my big turning point of that means I need to go get the help myself. I need to go and chase down my own healing. I need to go and spend time, digging into the depths of my own trauma, of my own history, of my own, what's triggering me and what's making this so appealing. So that was really my turning point. And I'd say that probably happened about 2 years before I actually ended up making the big shift within the relationship with this person, where I actually was able to comfortably exit the relationship in a healthy way, and he was able to actually get into rehab.
Banging your head against the wall, trying to navigate the complexities of a relationship impacted by childhood trauma, it doesn't have to be this daunting. When you're married to a partner with unresolved childhood trauma, it can feel like you're walking on eggshells, never quite knowing what will set them off. No matter what you try, it feels like there's always something triggering another emotional response that seems completely out of context. And the harder you try to fix it, the more discouraged you feel. So what's the issue here? Navigating marriage with a trauma survivor is different. The love languages don't work. Date nights don't work. Self-help books don't help. But here's the good news. I've created something that does work. Something built from years of hard-earned lessons and real-life experience. Ready to take the first step toward real change? Let's talk. I'm offering a free one-on-one call where we'll dive into what's going on in your relationship and figure out a way forward together. This isn't just another quick chat. It's a chance to finally be heard, to share what you're going through with someone who truly gets it. No judgment, just real support. So if you're ready to start making sense of it all and find a little more peace in your marriage, book your free call now. Your happiness, your peace, and your relationship are worth it. Let's do it together. Thank you for that. I'm loving our interview so far, and that was just the first part. And so we will now play the second part of that interview. Partners in a struggling relationship with someone who experienced childhood trauma, and the behaviors and the coping mechanisms that they're seeing in their relationship, they're like, if they would just get help, that things would get better. How do I convince him to
How
get
do I
help?
force? Is there a magical way to manipulate this person? Is there like a magical trick word that is going to force him? Like, is there a magical screaming tactic? And that's exactly what I hear all the time too, is like they're looking for the magic sentence, the magic word that makes that person change. And in wanting that magic response that makes them change, they're missing that Gestalt view that the problem they have is that need for them to change. The problem is not that this person isn't changing. The problem is, like we talk about codependency, the problem is the dependency on that person's state for you to be okay. That's the perfect segue. So how do you work with partners that are in this situation that ends up being a benefit to the relationship? So it's funny you ask that, because I just created a guide that makes it really simple for me to explain how I help people. Because what I used to do is say, oh, well, I have this whole system, and I do. But I actually created an interactive self-assessment guide that's just a Google Doc that people can take, where they can see here are all the areas that we actually work on shifting inside of my program, inside of Heal for Real. And it's 6 major shifts. So we have 6 modules, and you go through 6 major shifts of either perspective or behavior. And in shifting these perspectives and behaviors, we actually change the way that we are showing up in that relationship so drastically that the relationship system can't survive if that person continues doing what they're doing. So unfortunately and fortunately, what that means is that when the partner, the sober partner, shows up that differently, the relationship is going to do one of 2 things. It's either going to heal, that person's going to rise to the occasion, decide to make the necessary changes, which is what we see a majority of the time, or that person is going to decide that they don't want to rise to the occasion. The relationship is not something they want to participate in anymore. and the relationship falls apart. But luckily, when the sober partner gets the help first and goes through all these changes, the decision of the person in addiction is no longer so crucial and so life-threatening, or so, like threatening to their emotional state, right? So by the end of the process, if that person decides not to get help, you will be okay. And for a lot of people, that really scares them. They don't want to start a process that might mean that the relationship ends. And that's so sad to me, because that means a lot of people are choosing an unhealthy relationship, because not having the relationship is scarier than work that they could do.
I think that a lot of times that is the fear. They don't want to be alone. They don't want this, they don't want to face that pain of a relationship ending. But by avoiding it, I feel like the majority of my relationships and people that I deal with hit rock bottom.
Right. Yeah. And I see that all the time. I have people who will come to me, they want to get their partner into rehab, but when they realize that the work they have to do may end the relationship, they avoid the work. They avoid the work, which, the thing is, if you avoid the work entirely, you almost guarantee a dissolution of that relationship. It's going to fall apart one way or the other. It's either going to fall apart because it escalates so severely that one of you dies. That's not an exaggeration. It will escalate so severely that one of the people in this relationship dies, or it will fall apart because one of the people in this relationship no longer can stand the dysfunction, the unhealthy dynamic, the what turns into abuse. So if you're refusing to rise to the occasion, you've got to guarantee that the relationship as it currently is going to end. If you rise to the occasion of doing the work and healing and transforming the way you function in relationships, you that's the only way that you have an option of creating something healthy, fulfilling, and safe. And that's the thing that's so hard to convey to people when they're scared. So I know you'd ask, like, how do I help people? And like I said, we go through these shifts, and those are in the areas of like lifestyle, emotional perspective. So like we work on healing resentment and anger so that we're not triggered anymore. We work on debunking myths around addiction and around trauma so that we can actually think of them differently and not have our brains saying those, awful things about them all the time. We do a lot of work on self-knowledge and self-discovery so that we have a better understanding of our own emotional state, of our emotional landscape as we feel triggers or as we feel angry or sad or scared. We actually have an ability to hold those feelings instead of push them away or try to get that person to fix it by changing. And then we work on relationship skills. It's always kind of mind-blowing to people that we don't start working on relationship skills until 5 months into this process. But the reason for that is that if you aren't a person yet, you can't relate. We don't really start focusing on, like, here's a conversation to have, here's a way to talk to them, until we're all the way almost done with the program. And then that last month of the program, our month 6, we're actually designing a new life, and we're deciding, who are you in so far as your goals, your passions, the things you want to do with your time and your life, so that we don't have this idea of, my purpose is in saving them, my purpose is in spending time with them, my purpose is in whatever they say it is.
Can you touch on some of those false beliefs that people have
Sure.
around addiction and supporting someone with addiction?
A lot of the false beliefs that people have around addiction comes out of the kind of the AA mentality, the 12-step history that we have around addiction. Things like once an addict, always an addict. They need to hit rock bottom. You've got to give them tough love. Things like suggesting that the best solution is to remove yourself from them, or that people who struggle with addiction, if they're not actively working a program, are never going to be able to get healthy, and they're never going to be able to get better. Unfortunately, the research has proven that to be false. A majority of people who struggle with addiction overcome it on their own without going to a 12-step group, without even going to therapy. A lot of times it is just like a realization that, oh, this has to stop. And people go their own way and kind of DIY their way through recovery. But because we have this belief that the only way for them to change is to, go to therapy or to hire somebody or to join a support group or something like that, we believe that they're not actually doing any work and that they're not getting any closer to recovery if they're not doing those things. And once we believe that, we're just on a constant path of judgment. We're just viewing them through a lens of comparison, right? We're just comparing them to what we believe is true. And I think that, like I said, knowledge is power. Knowledge empowers you. So the more you can learn factually, as far as like what research has shown, what is actually working for people to recover, the easier it is to view a person who is actively struggling in a more compassionate and a more realistic light, so that you can see them even in active addiction while they're actively under the influence. You can see that and you can know that does not mean that tomorrow is not the first day of their lifelong sobriety, right? In order for someone to recover from addiction, the prerequisite is active addiction. But as long as we see their active addiction as evidence that they're not close to healing, we actually get in the way of that healing by putting pressure, by putting condemnation and hatred and vitriol into the relationship. So that's where we want to work on those beliefs that have really kind of become pervasive throughout society, and have damaged a lot of the trust that our loved ones may have otherwise had in us. When we show that we don't get it, that we have no idea anything about addiction and we don't really understand what the recovery process is like, when we show that we don't get that rehabs don't work, that's a big one. Rehabs are known to be ineffective. They're proven ineffective if you look at their actual rates of successful recovery. So rehabs don't work, and people in addiction know that. So when you're pushing them into rehab, you're just saying, I don't know what the hell's going on with you, and I don't want to learn. I just think you need to go somewhere so that you're not my problem. And that really doesn't help to engender like trust and connection and healing in a relationship.
Yeah, I can see that if they come back from rehab and the same patterns remain in a relationship, I can see
Right,
how that just wouldn't be helpful.
right,
What have
exactly.
you seen that having a healthy relationship, what is the benefit? What have you seen in how having that help people in their recovery process?
Large body of research that suggests that when we observe and consider people in a positive light, it affects their own self-perception, but it also affects their ability to effectively take on treatment and take on influence from us. If you hate them, they're not going to want to listen to you. If you hate them, you are going to help with their self-concept of thinking they're a terrible person. So you are pouring into that, kind of like nasty stew of self-loathing, but you're not helping with the solution, which is the opposite perspective of, hey, I do believe in you. I see you as someone of worth. It takes a lot of reinforcement after a life of abuse or of emotional trauma to change those beliefs. And so the more we as loved ones can show up on the side of, the true belief, the true reality of that person, that, they deserve to be cared for. They are a human being, which means that they're going to be flawed, and that's okay. They don't need to be ashamed of their flaws. Maybe it's okay to, feel some healthy guilt about certain things, but they don't have to have the toxic shame of like eating yourself alive because you did something or because you showed up in a certain way one time. Now that means you don't deserve to live, so continue to just drink yourself to death.
I have one more question for you.
Mhm.
Tell me about where you are today and all of the work that you've done and what has that led for you?
So, where I am today, I have a 3.5-month-old who is cutting his first tooth. Where I was, say, 5, 10 years ago, I wouldn't even consider my life that worth living. I was constantly trying to prove myself by being there for other people, by creating opportunities for other people. I produced like live theater shows and things like that, and I really had this like big ego about like giving people an opportunity and like I did this for you and I made your costume and I booked you in this gig and da da da, and everything that I did was to credit myself. I have a baby. I have a couple of businesses. I have this apartment. I have a Christmas tree in my background. Everything is what it is right now, and I'm able to enjoy it. and I don't have the just the constant anxiety of hoping that someone in my life is going to change for me.
I love that you have taken that part of yourself that wanted to help people and took it too far, but now you have created
Yeah.
an amazing way to channel that to help others in a healthy way. I absolutely love that.
I question myself about that all the time. That's one of my like, I keep that in the rearview mirror. I'm like, am I being codependent by wanting to help people who struggle with codependency? And the big indicator for me that I'm starting to fall off is in that identity. If I start to think of myself as the savior of the world, I need to go back to church, right?
Yes.
I need to refocus myself because that's not who I am and that's not what I'm here for. I do this because I enjoy it, because it provides meaning, because I think it's important. I wish it had existed when I was going through the same thing, but it's not, it's not my cape.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. This was fun.
Oh, I am absolutely loving that conversation. It was so packed with a lot of kind of mind shift recommendations for us as we are partners and we are trying to have and support someone who may have a trauma history and also be using drugs and alcohol to cope. But this show is all about the real deal. And so I want to make sure that all of you heard two really important things from this conversation. And the first thing is that people who have experienced trauma and who are using substances to cope, the best thing for them is a loving, healthy relationship. That is one of the most important things that can help them with their recovery and healing. Now, knowing that, I'm just going to be honest, they don't often make it easy for us to love them. And so that's where the work comes to play. And that is the other thing that I want all of you to get from this is that I think that we as partners can get caught up. And there's lots of fancy language for it, the codependency, that kind of thing. But if you are finding yourself in a position where all you think about, where all the conversations that you are having with other people is about your partner and them needing to get help, that it is all consuming, that you are letting your needs go to the wayside, that you're making excuses for the things that you're seeing in relationships, in your relationship, that maybe this is a time for you to explore if the way that you are showing up in your relationship is really helping things. And again, I know that that might be hard for some of us to hear, but what Corey said is that in many cases, your relationship, you may have morphed out of being in a relationship with your partner, and you may have morphed more into them being your only source of living. And so what I want all of you to hear is that we didn't get a handbook during school on how to handle relationships. And it is perfectly fine for all of us to say we don't really know what we're doing. The important thing is to know that there are some things that you can start doing today that will create healthier patterns, and that we can be there for each other in real relationships and not these relationships where we're just in these really bad patterns, making excuses and not taking care of ourselves. All right. Well, I am wishing everyone an amazing holiday, and I hope that this gave you some things to think about and also some resources for you to reach out to if you are like, this is me, or please share this if you know someone else who may be struggling in a similar situation, because they need to hear this. All right. Thank you so much.
All right, that's a wrap for today on Love and Trauma, the real deal. Big thanks to my guests for sharing their insights. Couldn't have done it without you. Now, for those of you looking to take this journey further, I've got something special. Head to my website to grab Real Tactics, Real Healing, a survivor's playbook for navigating a relationship with a trauma survivor. It's packed with everything you need to know, do, and say to navigate the emotional minefield, find your balance, and regain your self-worth and happiness.